Well, I guess welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us to chat about how to apply to graduate school, why you might want to go to graduate school, and how all this stuff works. I'm Zach Manchester. I'm an assistant professor in the Robotics Institute at Carnegie Mellon, and we have a whole bunch of wonderful students helping us out here tonight also to give you their perspectives on all of this as well. So do you guys want to each kind of introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'll go first. Hi, I'm Mrinal. I'm a third-year PhD student at the Robotics Institute, and I work on robot learning.
Hi, I'm Cherie. I'm a fifth-year PhD, and I work on autonomous off-road driving.
Hi, I'm Ananya. I'm a second-year master's student, and I work on path planning for multiple agents.
All right, thanks, guys. So I guess I do not have the clicking capabilities here, so whoever's got the slides. So here's what we're going to do while we're on here. First, I'm going to give a quick kind of like very general overview about different grad programs. This is intended to be generic, so I will sort of, some of this will be specific to CMU by its very nature, but it's intended to be like a high level, grad school in general, anywhere you might think about going to grad school, and like the different kinds of programs that you might look at. And then we're going to turn it over to the students to talk a little bit more in depth about the application process and kind of what all this is like. And then we're going to open it up to take questions from you guys online. And so I think actually the intention is for us to talk for 20, 30 minutes and then have about half the time reserved for Q&A. So while we're doing this, I would ask the general audience to feel free to type questions into the Zoom chat, and we'll be monitoring that, and we'll try to save them up for the end. Also, feel free to kind of like save those towards the end, but feel free to kind of type your questions in live to the Zoom chat. We'll kind of try to keep track of those and hit all the most popular ones, or get to most of these when we hit the Q&A period. Okay, with that, let's go. So why go to grad school? So I guess the first topic here is the sort of classes of different graduate programs that are out there. So broadly speaking, you have master's programs and PhD programs. Zooming into the master's programs, there's two sort of broad classes of master's programs out there. At CMU, we have both of these, but some schools only have one or the other. So you'll find there's sort of professional master's degrees. These tend to be heavily course-based and really intended for you to build skills that will be valuable in industry. So they're really intended to be like a terminal degree. They're sometimes called industry-focused or course-based masters. Then the other version is a research master's. These are they sort of de-emphasize courses and have a much bigger emphasis on doing independent research. There still are classes, but you will typically in these sorts of programs actually do research and often have a thesis that you have to write and present at the end of the program. And these are oriented towards potentially going on to a PhD program, or for maybe a more R&D focused or research focused job kind of in industry. What both of these programs have in common is that in most situations, they are self-funded, meaning you're typically going to have to pay tuition and support yourself during one of these programs. This is, again, typically, this is not always the case. There are sometimes opportunities to get partial or even full funding, for example, through TA-ships or research assistantships in these programs, but the general rule is that these are self-supported. And then the other thing to say about this, I guess, is they're typically about 2 years long. They vary a little bit. Usually the professional versions are shorter than the research versions, but they can vary anywhere from 1.5 years to say 2.5 years, depending on the details of the program. And then finally, both of these options tend to be easier to get into, or there are more spots available than PhD programs. I think that's roughly all of the things to cover there. So then comparing the master's to the PhD, PhD degrees are really all about doing research and are way less heavily focused on coursework. So you're typically only going to take classes for the first year or two of a PhD program, at which point you'll kind of transition over into really doing research full time. The other things that come along with this, You typically have opportunities to teach, for sure as a teaching assistant in most programs, you're required to do that. And then there's often mentorship opportunities where you end up supervising more junior students, maybe master's students or undergrads in a lab setting where you're kind of managing a project and kind of supervising other more junior students. The reasons to do this are varied, but I'd say this is the kind of thing, if you think you might want to be an academic, i.e. a professor or sort of research scientist in a university setting, this is kind of the career path. But also many research sort of roles in industry also exist that are kind of, really filled with PhD graduates. So the biggest thing here is that you want to be doing research as your career, whether it be in academia or industry. Let's see, other things about this. These are longer than a master's program. So these are usually 5-ish years, maybe a little bit longer, give or take. It sort of depends on your background to some extent. Like if you've already done a master's, this will be shorter. If you're coming straight from undergrad, this will be a little longer, but plan on this kind of like 5-ish year timeline, I would say. And then the other very important thing here is PhD programs are almost always funded. So in general, you're getting paid to be a PhD student. You're not paying tuition and you're also getting a stipend. You're basically getting a paycheck. So you're essentially like an employee and all that. So you're not actually paying your tuition and things like that in a PhD program. Okay, so here is a sort of rough timeline of what a 5-year PhD program might look like. This is modeled on the robotics PhD program at CMU, but it's fairly typical of what you'd see in most other universities. So the first couple of years, you're often going to end up taking courses to some extent, but the course load will still probably be lower than what you're used to in an undergrad major or in a, say, course-based master's program. And you're still expected to be doing research and sort of, for sure in the first couple of years, you're maybe ramping up your research while simultaneously taking classes, but you'll be taking classes and also trying to like get your footing in a research kind of setting during the first couple of years. Typically by the 3rd year, there's a couple of things that happen. So one is in any program, there's typically some sort of qualifying exam thing that happens by the 3rd year. In some places, you're expected to do it at the end of the 1st year or the end of the 2nd year, this kind of thing. It varies by program. Here at CMU in robotics, we have sort of 3 separate, we call them qualifiers. So research, speaking, and writing that you have to complete by the end of the 3rd year. In other programs at other places, you might have to do an oral qualifying exam where you sort of stand up in front of a chalkboard and get grilled for a couple of hours, which I had to do. And, this is still common at a lot of other universities. Some places do written exams where you sit down and like take a test for a couple of hours. It varies a lot, but generally speaking, you'll have some sort of, qualifying exam experience at some point. Then by the time you're in your 4th year, you should be like really well on your way to a dissertation topic. You kind of know what you're doing. And so here at CMU, we require a thesis proposal at this point where you're saying, here's the work I've done so far, and here's the work I plan to do over the next year and a half to finish off my dissertation. And we kind of all, the thesis committee meets and we all kind of like hear the game plan from the student and kind of all sign off on this plan that you're going to sort of execute in your last, say, year and a half towards graduation. So at this point, you really should know what you're doing and have a pretty solid roadmap to finishing up. And then, kind of year 5 is finishing up that research, getting papers out the door, writing your dissertation, putting all that together and doing a defense, which is really more like a sort of icing on the cake, victory lap sort of thing, rather than like a very intense, exam. It's more just, here's the stuff I've done, and everyone says, congratulations, this is awesome. And that's kind of the vibe at the end. So that's what these look like, roughly 5 years. Here is the handy decision tree that summarizes what I just said in a very succinct form. So if these slides will be posted on the website, so you can check these out later. The gist of this, though, is really like, do you want to work in industry versus academia? Do you really want to be doing research either in an R&D setting in industry or in a research lab in academia? Maybe that's the PhD side of it. If it's somewhere in the middle, maybe look at these master's programs. And, if you're not interested in research at all, it's probably not for you, and you should probably go get a job. I think that's roughly what this says. Okay, so on that note, I will shut up and pass it off to the experts in how to apply to grad school, since I haven't done this for a while, and these guys have much more recent relevant experience.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, let's talk about how do you actually go through the process of applying for graduate school. So there are four main components to your application, and they are going to be your CV, or your, I actually don't know how to pronounce that word, curriculum vitae, your statement of purpose, your letters of rec, and your test scores and your transcripts. So we'll go through these each one by one, and we'll expand a little bit more on what do these do and what makes a good portion of your application. But keep in mind, really, your application is a kind of argument you're building to the grad school about why you would be a good graduate student and why they should take you. And you really need to show, one, that you're qualified to be a graduate student, and two, that you have a good fit for their program. All right, so let's start with your CV. This is your chance to kind of concretely brag about yourself and say, list all the things that you've done in your undergraduate career, and maybe even outside of your undergraduate if you spend some time working. So definitely you want to include your research experience here if you have research experience. This could be everything from research you've done with a lab, or maybe like independent, longer research projects that you've engaged in and you've really kind of investigated some idea and seen where it went. Of course, if you have publications, if you have abstracts, posters, if you gave a talk about your research at any point, you want to include these here. Those are really good. Those are benchmarks in the academic world. Those are our kind of metrics that we use to measure how someone's research output looks. Absolutely, if you've done internships, even though they're not explicitly research focused, those are really valuable experience. Also, your work experience can also go here too. Because this shows that you research is both coming up with ideas and being able to execute and implement those ideas. So talking about this experience in your CV is going to show that you have the capacity to execute on your ideas. If you've gotten awards through your time in undergraduate or otherwise, or fellowships, we'll put them here, and we'll talk a little bit more about fellowships later. And lastly, other things, there's a lot of components that go into being a graduate student. So things like mentoring and teaching are very important to see on these, because that hints to the graduate school that you're going to be a good fit for their program and you're going to be able to deliver on being a graduate student. There are a couple things that maybe don't need to end up in your CV. If you have really short projects that are not super relevant, they don't need to make it in there. If you think that a project is going to be really relevant to what you're doing and you've spent some time on it, then definitely include it. But some of the shorter projects maybe don't need to make it there all the way. The other thing is, in a CV, graduate schools don't need to know about your citizenship, your age, a photo of you. That's not important or considered in the graduate school admissions process. Comparing a CV to a resume is going to be your one-page elevator pitch about who you are. A CV is going to be longer and more detailed. This should be a better, more cohesive document about what you've done and who you are. Make sure your formatting is clear and concise. There are a lot of resources if you Google online about how to write, like what should a CV look like. The best thing is honestly to find someone you like and copy their format. And that's going to make sure, like, those are usually tried and tested CV formats, and it's going to look good. If you have your papers online, or if your presentation's online, or if you had media about you, so you did a research project and it got covered in local news, link to those. Those are really good concrete things to show graduate admission committees that this is your work, and they can actually go look at it and evaluate it for themselves. You can make your CV as long as you want. Don't make it too long. You don't want to let your stuff get buried. 2 to 3 pages is usually what's considered the sweet spot, especially if you haven't started your graduate school yet. And the last thing, this applies both if you're writing a CV or resume, is you want to write very good action-oriented, result-oriented bullet points. So for example, I might say, and this is going to be in the robotics context, I optimized the planner to run 3 times faster in order to let our robots navigate better in the real world and avoid obstacles. Very results focused stuff. And you can even say, you know, we navigated 50% safer. We caused 30% fewer crashes. The humans had to intervene 20% fewer times. Those kind of metrics are very good for describing exactly what you did. So that kind of results-oriented bullet points, really good on your CV. Cool. So now we get to your statement of purpose, and this is going to be like a big portion of the meat of your application. And the statement of purpose is really where you have a chance to make your case to the graduate program about why you're a good graduate student and why they should take you. So there's going to be three kind of things in your statement of purpose. The first is going to be, what research are you interested in doing? And this is especially for research-based master's programs and PhD programs. So what problems do you want to solve? A very good statement of purpose, in the very first paragraph, it will say, this is the problem that I want, this is an issue I think that exists with the current state of research. Here is how I want to try and fix this issue or improve this method, or explore this research idea to improve the state of research, the state of robotics overall, if we're talking about robotics or computer science. You also want to talk about why the problem you've picked is relevant. Does it have personal importance to you? Is it helpful for the world? For example, in my statement of purpose, I talked about getting better robot learning as a way to help provide independence to the elderly or people who are disabled. Grounding your objectives in real world problems helps motivate what you want to do. The next part you want to talk about is why are you as a person qualified to tackle these problems and to deal with these problems. And this is where you're going to go through and talk about your prior experience. So here you want to talk about your major research or industry projects you've worked on. And you want to, again, build a cohesive narrative about how these lead you to being a qualified graduate student. You should talk about not only what you did, but what you got out of it. Did you learn more about the research process? Did you become a better collaborator? Did you understand a better philosophy towards research or how to start answering these tough problems? This is that time to go through and brag about yourself. You want to sell yourself to these graduate programs. And the last part of your application is going to be, or sorry, the last part of your statement of purpose is going to be why this specific program is right for you. And the first two parts can be a little bit more generic, and you might be able to copy those between statements of purpose for different graduate programs. But this last part should really be customized for the graduate program. And you have to do what's called demonstrating fit here. You have to say why they should take you and what you're going to get out of them. So this usually includes saying which professors would you be interested in being advised by or working with. And what specific resources does the program have that will help you? Maybe they have access to a really good motion capture space for your computer vision work. Maybe they have good collaborations with a medical school to do your healthcare related AI stuff. Whatever it is, now is the time to say why you're tailored to this program and why this program really helps you. And the last thing to say is, why are you doing your PhD? Do you want to be a professor? Do you want to do research? Do you want to solve these problems that you think exist in the field? And how will this program help you get there? This is a great way to kind of put a bow on it and wrap up why this program is right for you and why you really want to go there. A couple tips for writing your statement of purpose. I will say a lot of statement of purpose sometimes start with a paragraph that describes your life from when you were 5 up until now and how your childhood experiences molded your desire to go to graduate school. Those usually aren't as convincing as just coming out strong in that first paragraph about what problem you want to solve and why you want to solve it. Talking about your experience is valuable, but we don't need to know your entire life story. As we said, you're talking about your goals and what has motivated you to go to grad school and what you want to get out of it will be very helpful. And showing that you have some awareness of the community, both your local community and the more global community, and how your research and you as a graduate student can help give back to that is also a really powerful thing you can put in your statement of purpose. You don't want to overlap with your CV. Every part of your graduate school application should work together to form one cohesive argument, but you don't need to reiterate the same things. We have a couple useful resources for writing your statement of purpose, because I know it can be challenging. The example PhD statement of purposes are actually really good. I would strongly recommend you go through and read those and get an idea of what do successful PhD statement of purposes look like.
All right, so the next part of your application packet that is important are letters of recommendation. So these are letters that are written about you, basically vouching for you by people that you ask, people like research advisors, internship mentors, professors that you've worked with, that are basically vouching for you to the graduate program that you're applying to, talking about, from kind of a more outside perspective, why you would be a good candidate for their program. And these letters can come from a variety of different places. Most applications require at least 3 letters of recommendation. Most places allow you to submit more than 3. It is preferable that you have at least 2 from advisors in a more academic setting. If you have worked in an academic setting, for example, done research in a couple of different research labs or anything like that. And you want these letters to come from people who know you well and who know your work style, and all of the other pieces of what would make you a good graduate student. So strong letters could come from people that are your research advisors, mentors, professors that you TA'd for, anyone you've worked with for a more extended period of time and worked fairly closely with. Less strong letters could come from people where, like, a professor that you only took their class, even if you did well in the class. If you're in a class of 200 people, the professor is not really going to learn much about you that they could say that could add to your application. Same goes for people that you worked with, like employers or colleagues that you didn't work closely with. Okay. And it is a little bit difficult to navigate this since you don't write your rec letters yourself. You request other people to write them for you, but there are things that you can do to help your letter writers write you the strongest recommendation possible. So some ways to do that are choosing people that know you well and that could speak to your abilities as a potential graduate student. Another important piece is reaching out to them with plenty of time for them to be able to write and hone in on a good recommendation letter. Kind of a good rule of thumb is 2 months before your application deadline, you kind of initially reach out, ask if they would be willing to provide a recommendation, and then follow up with a reminder a couple weeks before. Another thing that you could do to help your letter writers is include some materials and talking points to kind of help them craft a letter that focuses on the things that you would like to highlight. This is especially helpful for both people that maybe don't have a ton of experience writing letters, and also for people that you might have worked with a few years ago who could have forgotten some of the more detailed information you want them to include. So sending your potential recommenders things like a description of the project that you did with them, or a copy of your statement of purpose, your CVs, your transcript, and even just specific notes that you would like them to highlight if possible. We also provide a couple links here that are actually for both letter writers, the first one, and for students asking for letters of recommendation that are super helpful. Okay, so this isn't a specific thing you fill out on your application, but fellowships are super helpful in the graduate application process. Not only are they prestigious and they make you look good as a line on your CV, they also make it a lot easier to match with the advisor that you want to work with, because advisors in a lot of these spaces keep an eye on the list of fellows. So things like the NASA fellowship, for example, advisors that work in space robotics or in space technology would keep an eye on which students are getting those fellowships, since those research interests align. Here is a very long list of fellowships. There are even more in the link that we've provided, but sort of generally, citizenship does become a bit of a deciding factor for a lot of these fellowships. A lot of the ones that are routed through government funding are limited to US citizens, or if it's US government funding. Some of them are specifically for non-US citizens. So individual countries could have fellowship resources. There are also a handful more like Fulbright that are from the United States, but for non-US citizens. And then a lot of the ones that are routed through industry and big companies like Meta and NVIDIA are without citizenship requirements. So the takeaway here is that there are a lot of fellowships out there, and taking a look at what might be a good fit for you would be a good step to take in your application process. Okay, talking more about finding the good fit. Finding good programs to apply to is also an important step, because a lot of grad school admissions comes down to fit. Basically, are there professors that would take you in as a student for their program or as part of that program? So identifying professors within the university or within the program that you're applying to that you would like to work with, and more than just, I think this person is cool, but also looking into current work that they're doing, maybe some current grad students that they have that you would want to work with, any work of theirs that they've followed, is useful both for just determining which programs to apply to, but also the defining fit or establishing fit section of your statement of purpose. It is also a good idea to mention those specific professors when you write that section of your statement of purpose. And that brings us to a general big question of, should you reach out to these professors before you've applied or before you've heard back from your programs? That is a very difficult question with a lot of nuanced answers. So it depends on so many factors. We have provided a link that goes into it in much more detail, but in general, take a look at what they say on their personal websites, because a lot of professors will be very upfront about the kind of communication they would like to have with potential students, whether they're okay with people reaching out during the application process, whether they prefer if you reached out once you've heard back from programs. A lot of times professors will make that information publicly available. So go take a look, see if you can find that information first, and go from there. Okay, great. Also, speaking of just the application process in general is very complicated, a lot going on. SCS specifically has a program called GASP, the Graduate Application Support Program, which pairs up people applying to the PhD programs in SCS with current SCS PhD students to kind of provide more guidance and be a more one-on-one mentor. It is a really great resource to use if a computer science or robotics or related PhD is something that you are going for. However, the deadline is very, very soon. It is in 2 days. It is November 11th. So if that is something that you are interested in, please do apply. It is a very simple Google form, should take about 10 minutes, but is a great resource. Another resource at SCS at CMU specifically, but a lot of other schools may have this, is an application fee waiver. So grad school is expensive to apply to. A lot of places will waive that application fee if you fall under a specific like group, category, thing like that, that they are including in their waiver. We have provided a list to SCS's list of those waiver accepting categories, I guess. And for any programs that you're applying to, this is a great thing to kind of try to find so that you don't have to pay for your application.
All right, hey guys, thanks, Ananya. So I'm going to go through kind of a maybe more biased perspective of what grad school is like from our perspective. So kind of just high-level differences between the US and international programs for graduate school. In the US, you generally apply for a particular program, for example, a PhD in robotics, and not specifically for like a particular project within a certain lab. Also, second, funding situations may vary. Generally, PhDs are typically like fully funded. However, it is also a great question to take a look at the different programs to make sure. And also, a lot of people actually come straight from undergrad directly to PhD. For example, that's what I did. And a US PhD is generally, I believe, longer than like maybe some international programs where it takes 5 to 6 years. And then lastly, so I'm also an international student, and it always amazes me how huge the United States is, and that cities from like different cities, you might have really different experiences. So also thinking about that when applying to the programs you want would be great. So things like weather might be very different. For example, in Pittsburgh, you really get the 4 seasons, whereas in other places you might not. It might be sunny all the time. The city infrastructure may also vary, where some areas it's a very like car city, where some is more public transportation heavy. The cost of living is also quite different, and also just in general, the culture of the area. So definitely try thinking about these perspectives when applying to. All right, so we're gonna go through a couple of our day in the lives, and hopefully that can give you some nuggets of what it's like to be us. All right, so starting it off, so the area of robotics that I work in is called field robotics, so which is kind of going out into the wild a lot, like into like forest areas. So I kind of live 2 lives. One is when I'm on campus. Generally, I get to campus, then try starting my workday with debugging code. And then we have in the RI, we have a great thing called Robo Lounge, where we can get free tea, play foosball and hang out, or talk about the latest bugs that we're facing, then come back, do more work, and then have lunch, have a one-on-one meeting with my advisor, and then more work. And then at 6 p.m., I generally call it a day and then go try finding free food and generally relax. All right, then my second life is when I have to do field testing to test our robots and whatever algorithms we're doing, whether or not it works. So I work on off-road driving. So here at the bottom right corner, this is actually, I believe, one of our like data collection trials. So we're driving a autonomous vehicle around the forest. So generally the day starts, we meet the lab mates at our test site, discuss test plans so that hopefully it goes efficiently, put on sunscreen, and then spend some time loading the code on the robot, and for us drifting in mud. Then of course, during the field test day, we actually use up quite a lot of calories, so finding food is critical. And then more autonomy test. Then for this day in particular, let's kind of like skip to the next slide to see what happened. Yeah, so while we were actually manually driving the robot, it was actually a rainy day the day before. So what we didn't know was actually the mud was so soft that our whole ATV just kind of sank into the mud puddle. And we tried for a really long time, like just like engaging the acceleration, trying to pull on it, trying to like dig it out, but nothing worked. We got stuck for 2 hours, so we actually had to call up the test site operator and get help, and that was Jake pulling us away. So this is some glimpse of what the field robotic research life might be like. All right, and off to the next person.
Hey, yeah, so this is what my day in the life might look like. I work on robot learning, more specifically for manipulation. So unlike Shuri, I don't get to go out and explore the wonders of the outdoors. I get to campus maybe a little bit later than most, around 10 a.m. Usually my first hour is catching up on emails and chatting with my lab mates. This is a great time to say if I'm stuck on something, bounce some ideas off of them, get some ideas from them. I have a couple of undergrads and master's students who work with me, and I try and meet with them fairly regularly. My goal is to make them help them be as productive as possible. So if they have things that are blocking them in their project, I try and see what I can do to remove that, be that bugs in the code or access to some data set or chatting with an author of a paper. I try to make that happen. I'm finishing up one of my last classes right now. It's a seminar on deep learning for robotics. It's very exciting. Then lunchtime is always a great time. Sometimes it's fun to just hang out with friends. Sometimes it's great to get lunch with your collaborators or people you may not get to talk to all the time. I try and reserve afternoons to spend some time to get some concrete research work done, be that finishing up some code, writing a proposal, or making some slides for a presentation. I usually have my first dinner around 7, and then after that, I'll go to the gym and then head home. And usually a second dinner happens later into the evening. On the right, I have some of the robots I commonly work with. These are at 3 different scales. I have a small arm that is very good for testing out smaller things. It's pretty robust, and I'm okay if I break that one because it's less expensive. My medium arm is great for handling manipulation tasks on a tabletop. It has a good range of motion and can interact with most things on there. You can see my lab mate Arcas in the background. I don't actually know how many degrees of freedom a human has, so I guessed around 300. If anyone knows, let me know. And then lastly, I have a large humanoid robot as well that does some larger scale manipulations like opening cabinets or drawers.
Cool. So I kind of work somewhere in between these two realms of field robotics and severely not field robotics, where I do field robotics, but I do all of the software for field robotics. So every now and then I get to go outside. I typically get to campus around 9. I start off my day with kind of making a priority list of tasks where I prioritize in order of how absolutely necessary it is that this task happens today. I also try to deal with any emails that I have at that point in the morning. And then my morning continues into a bunch of external meetings, either with sponsors or with professors or student collaborators at other universities. I also try to split my research up into kind of 2 categories. The first being research, the communication edition. So that is doing things like making slides for presentations, writing research proposals, editing research proposals, sending more emails to people, all of that kind of stuff. Then I, around lunchtime, go and try to find food and or friends. I am currently taking a class in planning for robotics after many years of doing research in planning for robotics, finally formalizing it, which is great. And then after class, I have a bunch more meetings, but these are all internal. So these are with, say, my advisor or with my lab group, a subgroup of my lab, with undergrads that I'm working with, or just with other collaborators that are here at CMU, maybe from other labs or things like that. And then we go into research, but the science edition this time. So things like writing out code, reading papers, analyzing results, ideating, all of that good stuff. And then I try to get out of here around 8. I try to go to the gym, make some dinner, do homework because I am a master's student. I still have classes are still a big part of my life, and then do some relaxing. And yes, and on the right is my desk setup. The bottom picture is a robot called Zoe. She is a planetary rover that stays on Earth and is just to test out a bunch of code that could potentially be useful for planetary exploration missions in space. And then that is a robot that I work with on days that I do go and field test. Otherwise, my day is usually spent at the desk in that picture, surrounded by collaborators, code, and caffeine.
Awesome. So the really exciting thing about, especially like in grad school and then especially in the RI, is that you'll be privy to so many like different people working on all different niche areas. So this is actually a picture from my cohort, so my year of PhD. And then you could see a group lunch is actually kind of turns into a mini robot conference where we have a lot of varied parties coming from like the planning background, human robot safety, manipulation, like all sorts of things. So it's really fun because you actually get to like, you're already organized into a mini robot conference and you actually get to chat about it. Okay. And then more formally, when we're actually in conferences, we actually go to them kind of like in a squad and then hang out there and of course like also watch each other's presentation. So this is from two previous conferences, one being IROS and one being ICRA. All right, so after we talked about getting you guys to apply to grad school, we will try to propose why CMU. So coming from the RI, we're a top robotics program and one of the largest where we have 60 plus faculties and 500 plus students. So to this point, I always kind of describe this program as being in the Disneyland of robotics, where especially for like in the Field Robotics Center, we actually, every day I just see like different robots interact with each other that I would never have thought happen, such as like maybe one of the planetary robots need to make way for my drone sometime. Just so it's like Disneyland. You get to interact with different robots, but also at the same time, similar to what I talked about with the mini robot conference, you just get to really chat with people who are in a completely different area in robotics and ask them what's up, what kind of bugs they're fixing right now. And so there's a lot of, especially in the CMU RI, just a general breadth of people who are all doing very in-depth research into their field. And we also are proud to say that we are the first PhD in robotics worldwide. And being in CMU, we also have very tight relationships with industry, especially like with, and this linked here, 140 plus like local organizations where there was a lot of like robotic startup that spun out of a lot of the research projects that was developed here. We also have very tight collaborations with government. So a lot of our research projects are actually government funded through like NSF or the ONR. And also, we're also very close with other academic departments. Robotics, we like to think of it as kind of like at the confluence, kind of combining a lot of disciplines in order to act on like our physical environment to make things happen. So we often actually collaborate with other academic departments, such as like machine learning, human computer interaction, and also like the bio. And specifically going into like why Pittsburgh, we have a great cost of living, which we have a more detailed slide later, where a one bedroom rent is around $800 to $1,300. If you even share it with flatmates, that goes down to $500 to $800. And a typical, let's say $2 sign dinner is around $15 to $20 per person. And at CMU RI, the health insurance is university supported for PhD students. And this actually also covers a lot of mental health resources within the health insurance. And in the linked slides, we also have a link to all the different things you can do in Pittsburgh. There's a lot of parks. There's a lot of great things that you can actually go for free, even to like museums and things like that. All right, so getting more into the cost of living, putting some numbers to it. So if you earn the RI PhD stipend, which is right now at $38,000, in order to replicate the same standard of living you can afford with that RI PhD number, we take, I think, 4 cities. And in San Francisco, you would have needed to earn $69,000. In New York, $88,000. In Boston, $57,000. In Seattle, $57,000. So it really varies, like, especially in these larger cities, the cost of living may be like 1 times to, I guess, in the New York, for the New York one is like almost to 2 times, 3 times. All right. Cool. So I think we'll kind of go through some frequently asked questions. Then after that, end with like the more grandiose, like 30-minute of answering your questions from the Q&A and also from like the YouTube links. So I think for the first question, how much research experience or background in robotics should I have before applying for a PhD or research-based master's? Or how many publications? So in general, there's no hard and fast rule, I would say. And in general, grad school are just really excited to have people who are passionate about the topic and can also articulate why they really want to dive in and answer not yet answered questions, because that is what research is about. It's about really digging deep into the problem and really finding out, hey, like what is going on here. With respect to that, for a PhD, generally, we generally do want people who might have more like some research experience, so that because it is a longer time commitment, in the US being 5 to 6 years, that they know what it takes to do research and after doing so are still passionate about really making an impact there. And I would say that if you don't have as much research experience, definitely a research-based master's is a great way to cultivate these and also really understand what it is like to be a researcher. And this is generally a 1 to 2 year plan.
Great. So the next frequently asked question is, how important are standardized testing scores? I think generally standardized test scores think about it as a check mark more than a metric. Admissions committees just want to see that you can perform reasonably well on the standardized test. And actually these days, a lot of admissions committees don't even require them anymore. The one case where it can be very helpful is if you feel like you have underperformed on your academic grades. Showing really good standardized test scores can help convey that you are a good student.
All right, so the next one is, what is the FERPA waiver? So FERPA covers a lot of privacy relating to your information stored with universities. As it applies to applications specifically, the FERPA waiver is something that you sign that tells the university that you will not read your recommendation letters. What that communicates to the program that you're applying to is typically that these recommendations are candid and are honest reflections or honest input from your recommenders. So it typically is a good idea to waive that.
All right, so I guess I'm on deck for this one, which is like kind of what are the most important, or what is most important in out of the statement of purpose, letters of recommendation, grades, test scores, research experience. I think this is a like kind of unanswerable question, honestly. All of these things get accounted for in various ways. I think ultimately what the admissions, so for the record, I'm on the master's admissions committee in robotics at CMU right now. And I mean, I think ultimately what we want to see in the like research-based programs, so like the MSR program and the PhD program at CMU, is that you're going to be a good researcher. And the best way to demonstrate that in your application is having done research. So the metric there is like, if you have published a paper at a conference, I think that tends to carry a lot of weight and sort of assuages many concerns that you like may have. That's ultimately what you're going to be doing in grad school. So if you've already published a paper at a major, say, robotics conference like ICRA or something like this, that probably is going to be the single biggest like bump of any of these things. As Renal alluded to, the test scores are really more of like a minimum threshold thing. Like if you're a few points higher than someone else, but you've both sort of like crossed the bare minimum threshold, it really isn't going to matter. So I wouldn't stress out about the test scores so much. It's basically like you need to get reasonable scores to, but after that point, like there's basically a sort of a minimum bar. If you're over that, it doesn't matter. And then, yeah, grades are tough because of differences between different institutions. And we try as best we can to calibrate for that. And generally, like there's also students on the, so A, there's students on the admissions committee as well. And B, there's faculty from all over the world. So we like to think we're fairly well calibrated. We have students from like every country and basically people who've come from like every, kind of top university all over the place. So people tend to know what the calibrations are between different universities and different places. That said, it is totally possible that you're coming from somewhere that no one has seen before and things like that. So that gets tough. I think that's actually the hardest thing, is knowing how to calibrate between different schools and grades in different countries. And letters are also similarly, tough. So I think there's like a huge amount of variability in these things. We try to account for that the best we can. Ultimately, the ultimate arbiter, if you're trying to get into a PhD program, is going to be research. So if you've published a paper, this counts, no matter what, and it will be a big bump if you've published at a conference. And statement of purpose, super important, but also super individual and super hard to really like. And so I think there've been a few questions I've seen also asked about this. I think like my personal take is, I want to see people's like, passion in there for what they're doing. I think that's the best place to convey that. Like, why are you excited about this? Like, why do you care enough to spend like 5 years of your life, on this thing? Like, what gets you excited when you get out of bed in the morning? Like, why do you want to do this? I want to have that like sense of like, just intense like excitement about what you're talking about in there, so I don't know, it's super tough. Like, this is a hard thing. It's a very stochastic process just because people are different, schools are different, but I think of these things personally, I would say the ones that matter the least are the test scores. They're just this minimum bar thing. And the one that matters the most, I think, ultimately is the research experience stuff, especially having prior publications on your CV. And then, letters and statement of purpose are sort of in the middle, but are super important also. That's my take.
Awesome. So I'll take the fifth question, other opportunities beside master's or PhD degrees. And I'm going to take this as kind of like research opportunities. So there are also a lot that is available through kind of like research assistantships that you can also apply to, that which is not to grant you a degree, but that is actually like a job. So specifically, for example, in CMU, there's a lot of labs that are also hiring for research assistants that to do different like research tasks. So that is actually a great way to get an in and also learn how the whole process of like how to publish, how to formulate a question, and also to get a letter or recommendation letter. So quite a lot of my friends actually took that route where they were hired as a research assistant, then transferred to the master's, reapplied, and then applied for the master's or a PhD program. So this happens both, I believe, in academics, so like at different universities, and also in industry. I believe there are also some research like engineer positions, research assistants available as internships or as full-time positions.
All right, and last but not least, how do you know which faculty are currently hiring new PhD students? The best way to figure this out is to go to their webpage. Many faculty will put on their webpage not only if they're hiring, but what positions they're hiring for. And that'll also what positions, what projects they're hiring for. So that'll tell you if the project that you're interested in has availability for a student. Also, if you decide to email them and their page does not say, do not email me, you can email them and they might tell you if they're hiring students or not. So that can be another very useful metric to know. Do they have room to take you on as a student this year?
Okay, so
Right.
I think we can get started with all of the other questions that have been collected over the course of this.
Should I go first?
Go for it.
Okay, so there were two questions, and I can answer these both together. One was, does having research which is quote unquote mediocre or minor changes to an existing architecture and maybe published in a quote unquote mediocre journal hurt the application? And the other similar question was, will a survey paper or a mediocre paper be considered as a publication? I think it's important to note that as an undergrad or as someone who's doing research before the graduate school process, it is hard to make research contributions at the same level that a senior graduate student or a professor would make. So setting your expectations accordingly is important. And the admission committee knows that. They're not expecting groundbreaking research from you as an undergrad, but they are expecting you to show that you have a capacity for research. So if you believe that your survey paper or the paper that you thought made a quote unquote incremental contribution shows that you can do research and you can do reasonable research, absolutely include that. And I think that most papers that go through the research process and the peer review publishing process demonstrate that you have that capacity for research. So in general, you should still include them. They're still valuable.
I'll add a practical note to that. It is practically pretty unlikely that, so being on a admissions committee is a kind of a lot of work and you read a lot of applications. It's highly unlikely that people are going to actually go find the paper from your CV and scrutinize it. They're probably going to look at your CV and say, hey, this person published a paper. I've never heard of this journal, but that's cool. So I would say you're not going to be scrutinized very heavily on the content of a paper that you put on your CV on this application. So I would say put it down and don't worry about it too much.
I can take the next question, which so there were two questions on this, which is about while applying for grad school, is it important to mention a niche area in the SOP or a general one? So there are two questions of this flavor. So from my perspective, it is good to kind of like strike a balance between generality and also being niche. So if you go for like the super niche way, you do want to make sure that the program would be able to support your research in that particular interest. So that's a checklist item. And if not, I think in general, in your SOP, what you want to do is to show that you're very passionate about an area, and ideally not an area that is as general as robotics, because that might not make it actionable. So you want to show kind of in your SOP that you are able to identify a niche area than just a general, for example, robotics field, and really articulate why you're passionate about this, what kind of problems you might be seeing, and then finally, why being at that program would really accelerate your progress to solving this problem. So choose an area that is niche enough such that you can talk about these nuances in a kind of coherent and thoughtful manner.
Okay, I can answer a couple quick questions that came up. The first one is, since the Robotics Institute is under SES, could you work with faculty across the computer science department or SES in general? The short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is that you do need to have your primary advisor be a Robotics Institute faculty member, since you will be a Robotics Institute student. That being said, you work with a thesis committee, and you could even have a co-advisor who could be from a different department within SES. They could also be from a different department altogether. There are requirements for various thesis committees, like if you're a PhD student, your speaking qualifier committee, if you're a master's student, your thesis committee, on the number of professors that you need from within the Robotics Institute. But in general, it is possible to collaborate with faculty from different departments, both within SES and within CMU in general, either just through individual projects or through having them on your committee. The other quick question I wanted to take is, when is it recommended to do a master's program before applying to a PhD? So I think that there are two times or two reasons you might want to do a master's program before looking at a PhD program. The first is, I think, as Cherie mentioned, if you don't have a ton of research experience, doing a master's program after your bachelor degree is a good way to build that. I think the other time you might want to look at doing a master's program first is if you're not sure how committed you are to having a career in research. A PhD is a much more long-term commitment than a master's program is. So if you're more on the fence, if you really like research but are not sure about like being a professor or having a career that is research, a master's program could be a good way to kind of test that out.
All right, I guess I'll be on deck for one. So there's a question about having a long-term goal like democratizing AI, creating potentially, I don't know, disagreement with admissions committees, readers, and like some concern over this. My take on this in general is I think you want to convey like passion, excitement, and like just really strong sense of I want to be doing this. I think having like a, you know, sort of maybe a bit of a grand vision kind of vibe to the statement is totally okay. And as long as you back it up with some concrete, you know, you can have the like, you know, grand vision, but I think backing it up with, you know, some very concrete, you know, steps in that direction or something is good. I would not worry too much about saying things that are, you know, slightly controversial or maybe polarizing and like having different opinions on the review committee. I don't think that's going to hurt you. If anything, you'll get like different people on the committee, you know, disagreeing with each other, and that's okay. I think like just go all in on whatever you're passionate about. Like that's it, and you know, have opinions and be a bit, you know, being a bit like kind of strong in your opinions and your passions, whatever is the right thing to do in general. Okay, and I think we are just about out of time. So if we have like one or two more things to go around with final questions, we should do that, and then we should wrap it up. Did we hit everything that was in the immediate list?
There's a couple more. Nanya, do you want to answer one and I'll answer one and then we'll wrap it up?
Yep, sounds good. You can go first.
Okay, so there were a couple questions about recs. One was, can I have recs only from my master's professor and not any from my undergrad professors? The other was, I want to apply for a master's professor, or master's program. Should I get a rec from my employer, even if my job does involve robotics? Your recs should, again, this is a chance to get an external point of view on how you could be as a graduate student. So to actually answer the second one first, even if it's not about robotics, but it talks about that you are a very diligent worker and you're capable of executing on these tasks and you're capable of being a good problem solver, then that's still a very useful thing to include in your, it's still a very useful rec to include. Again, so the question about master's recs versus undergrad recs, it's absolutely understandable to have undergrad recs if you're a master's student applying for a PhD. You can also only have masters. At the end of the day, you want to pick the professors or mentors or advisors who can speak best to your capabilities as a graduate student. So undergrad masters doesn't really matter based on where it comes from.
Okay, cool. I will quickly answer, are publications required for admission into MSR? Nope, not a hard and fast requirement at all. And is it worth including a personal challenge that you've overcome in your statement of purpose? Yes, especially if you can frame it as part of the why does this make you the right person to answer the research challenge that you would like to answer.
Cool. All right. Thank you everyone so much for coming. These slides, as well as a recording of this talk, will be posted Make sure to go look at those resources we linked for the Graduate Application Support Program that closes November 11th, as well as example statements of purpose, the list of fellowships, and every other link we posted in this chat.